discuss all this with our guest in the studio, international affairs and security analyst Mark Sleboda. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Sleboda. Very nice to see you. So it's being called a political earthquake, the greatest comeback of all time. But what's your reaction to the news that Donald Trump's coming back?
Okay, so that might be a little bit of exaggeration, a little bit of self-aggrandizement, but I think we can expect that from Trump so far. We know to expect that. That said, I think that once the polls were closed and the results started coming in, it was shocking to everyone how quickly and how thoroughly it was all over. Yeah. There was a resounding victory for former president, now president, or soon-to-be president again, Donald Trump, president-elect. And the first thing, the surprise of the speed and the thoroughness of the victory, sweeping all of the swing states as far as we know thus far, is that the polls in the U.S. are broken. They are broken again, just like happened in 2016, which makes work as an analyst for anyone extremely difficult to predict, what the results will be. Thankfully, it was over rather quickly and with very little pain. But I think there needs to be a serious reassessment of the methodology of the polling agencies, and we have to start to question how much of what the polling agencies do is flawed methodology and how much of it is politicized propaganda trying to force an outcome on results that on the ground tell us something extremely different as far as the common people are concerned.
I think one thing about Trump coming back into the Oval Office is the next 4 years, anything can happen. All bets are off now. With Kamala Harris, it would have been predictable. She would have toed the line, I expect. And one of Trump's many campaign pledges is to end the Ukraine conflict within 24 hours in office. That's what he said. How do you think he'll go about making good on that promise?
Okay, first of all, I think we have to take that with a grain or maybe a bushel or a ton of salt and just throw it over our shoulders. That's not going to happen. First of all, neither the leadership of the West-backed Kiev regime in Ukraine want a deal, want an end to the conflict on terms as they exist right now, and neither does Russia. And it is extremely unlikely that any deal, Trump loves his deals that he presents, will be acceptable to either Kiev or Moscow. Moscow understands, and the West is finally coming to understand, or no longer being able to deny, that Russia is winning on the battlefield. So we've heard some of these plans of Trump surrogates of present and past, like Mike Pompeo. They're completely unacceptable to the Russian government, calling for a ceasefire, an effective freeze of the conflict with the possibility that Kiev can rearm and then take that ground back in a few years. That's completely unacceptable to Russia. I mean, it's just an absolute no-go from the start. And Trump will once again find himself constrained, just like he did in his first administration, by the limits of his office. The U.S. president actually has very little control over foreign and military policy, right? Whether you want to call it, Ben Rhodes called it the blob, the foreign policy elite, the deep state, the permanent bureaucracy, they will present him with a very limited range of options. To me, the most important thing is going to be when he presents his deal. Let's forget what Zelensky and the Kiev regime says at the time, but what happens when Putin says no? How is Trump going to take that? Because then the obvious, he has already threatened to flood Ukraine with so many weapons, his usual exaggeration, to force Russia to accept his deal. Except that the U.S., as he's later admitted, doesn't have those weapons, right? They don't have the munitions required to sustain this regime in this conflict. The military-industrial complex isn't geared up to produce artillery shells and air defense interceptor missiles. And the Pentagon stocks are completely empty at this point.
So it's all inconsistent.
It's all inconsistent. So certainly there might be increased pressure on Russia from maybe some of its allies in the BRICS, like Brazil and India, to accept the deal. But right, as far as we can tell right now, certainly from such figures as Medvedev and Lavrov, is that Russia intends, no matter what happened during the election, to stay the course. The goals of the special military operation will be completed and realized. And the sooner the U.S. learns to accept that, that's the only time there will be peace, not with Trump's deal.
Well, we are seeing reports that Ukraine is preparing to withdraw from Russia's Kursk region as Trump achieves this resounding victory. I mean, coincidence or not, because I'm not sure Zelensky would be feeling very confident now that there's been such a dramatic shift in the Oval Office. What do you think?
First of all, the Kiev regime's troops in Kursk have been locked in a fire bag, and they have suffered enormous casualties that the Kiev regime can't afford in both manpower, some of its best remaining units, and in increasingly scarce Western gear, including such systems as HIMARS, as Leopard and Challenger and Abrams tanks and the like. They've been bleeding so much for absolutely zero strategic gain or value from this. This was a short-lived tactical and InfoWar success and a huge strategic catastrophe that has led to the acceleration of the collapse of the Kiev regime forces in South Donbass region and the Pokrovsk area. So I think Zelensky is actually taking advantage of this situation, of Trump's election, to do what he should have done a long time ago and withdraw from a bad situation instead of throwing good after bad. I think he's just, this isn't a signal, I don't read it as a signal of him moving towards peace discussions or negotiations. Rather, he's taking advantage of a change in political circumstance to do what militarily should have been done a long time ago.
I think we've almost come to expect that the results of any election, there's going to be a huge party of people not accepting it with dignity. And right now, some US media are trying to shift the blame for the Democrats' failure onto Biden. What do you make of that strategy or that idea?
Well, that's like kicking a senile old man while he's down, which is, I guess, is exactly the situation. I think, first of all, the Democratic mandarins, the Democratic donors, the first things that they need to look at is themselves and the agenda they've been pushing on the country. Secondly, I think the media itself also bears a huge amount of responsibility. They had zero criticality in coverage of Biden. In these last few years, as he obviously started to cognitively fail, and it became heresy to mention that in the liberal-controlled media in the United States. Similarly, when the shift was made, when the donors made the decision, right, we see how much is democracy and how much is oligarchy, right with that. But there was zero criticality of the anointment of Kamala Harris and of what her effectiveness would be against Trump. And that led us right to the situation where we are now. So the Democratic Party elite and the media are the ones that really ought to be looking at themselves critically in the mirror this morning. But of course they won't.
Thank you for coming in to speak to us today. It's good to hear from you. International affairs and security analyst Mark Sleboda. Thanks.
Thank you.